Alright, so today I am going to be looking at In C by Terry Riley. This is a classic piece of minimalist music, maybe one of the first pieces of minimalist music. It's from 1964, and I'll try to give the best historical context I can for it. But just be mindful that I'm kind of, as usual, doing everything off the cuff and just pulling up what I can find online here. Hopefully this video can serve some sort of pedagogical purpose. I know that this is a very popular piece to share in like music survey courses, because this is sort of where it all started in terms of like American minimalism. We'll start with the score. So this is what the score looks like. You can see it's broken up into these little modules, and each one of them is like a number of beats long. Like you could subdivide it by quarter notes usually. Sometimes it doesn't quite fit the beat, I think, although it's hard to say. But the idea is you have a percussionist at the back keeping time with a metronome like pulse, usually on a clave or some other dry sound like that. And then the ensemble, every player is given this to work with, and they repeat these modules as long as they want. Every player kind of moves from one to the next at their own speed, and the piece ends when the last player is done playing the last module. So some of the performing directions, as I said, every performer plays from the same page in sequence. Any number of any kind of instrument can play. So this is an example of a piece for variable instrumentation. It's usually done with an orchestra, but you could do it with literally any group of 35 musicians. Less or more is fine, but 35 people is recommended. And then vocalists can sing the same lines on any vowel or consonant that they like. The performers have some freedom over how many times they will repeat each module, so that's where this sort of like variability comes in. But the performance should last up to like 45 minutes to an hour. So, you know, you're repeating these things a lot, basically. It's important that performers listen carefully to one another. It's okay if they drop out, like stop playing just to listen to other performers. And a range of dynamics is desired, so don't just play everything as loud as possible. I think that would be the tendency with a classical group, because classical musicians don't really improvise with one another. So these are just good general directions for improvising. He talks a little bit about what the sonic result should be, what it should sound like, and how it's important not to hurry from one pattern to the next. Because as you could imagine, if you didn't repeat any of these, you could play through them in a minute, but you should be repeating them so much so that at least somebody in the ensemble plays for 45 minutes. Here, that eighth note pulse I was talking about in the percussion, it's actually optional. It can be aided. It can aid the ensemble. I think it's pretty necessary with enough players, like if it's a very large ensemble. And it actually has to be a high C. So you would need to do it on a piano or glockenspiel or xylophone, something like that. The idea is that all the performers are locked into this grid and they're performing very strictly. If a performer can't play one of the patterns, they should just move on to the next one. And obviously this is all notated in treble clef, but you would transpose it into any octave depending on your instrument. Transposing instruments have to do a little bit more mental work to make sure that they're playing this as the sounding pitch. Okay, so it's actually it's not as simple as I thought. Every performer has to arrive on 53 and stay there and wait for the other ensemble members to reach figure 53. Once everyone has done that, then you can start to end the piece. probably by fading out. So there's actually a little bit more to it than just everyone playing through it. But there you go. You can see that there's a wide variety of lengths of these different repeated things. Some of them have big rests, like stretches of rests in them. Some of them are just very long held notes. Some of them are more syncopated, sort of dividing the pulse into threes. And he slowly introduces notes outside of the C major scale, so you get this F sharp in a lot of the modules, and then that sort of stops. Then you get a B flat in this very long passage later on, and some B flats towards the end. So there is this sort of like, not tonal trajectory, but there's like a sort of modal shift over the course of the piece from the one sharp to the one flat, which I think some people might be able to hear. Terry Riley is an American composer born in 1935. He's still living today. He's best known as the pioneer of minimalism. He is influenced by jazz and Indian classical music, like Hindustani music, I'm assuming. All of his work uses a lot of repetition and improvisation. Interesting that they talk about tape music techniques and delay. I guess the technology of the tape delay was well into well past its infancy when Terry Riley wrote this, and may have had some sort of influence on his musical style. Same thing with, if you think about tape loops, that technology was becoming more and more accessible to people in 1964. His work has influenced like experimental rock and electronic music, things like that. He also has works that explore just intonation, which we haven't really covered in any pieces in our series, but that might be a whole other thing to get into once we have a piece like that. Basically, he's just interested in alternate tuning systems different from equal temperament. So another big name in minimalism around this time was Lamont Young. Lamont Young does a lot of stuff with just intonation, and I guess the two of them were close. And he's busied himself with various organizations, like the San Francisco Tape Music Center and the Theater of Eternal Music. This is an avant-garde musical group that was led by Lamont Young. In the 70s, he began studying Hindustani singing with Pandit Pran Nath. And that's sort of, I think that's been more or less the focus of his art since the 70s. He's really interested in improvised music and non-Western music practices. Let's look up at in C a little bit, because as much as I want to get deeper into Riley's bio, I don't think that the later half of his career is really important if you're just trying to understand this piece. It's probably one of the most successful works by an American composer ever. It's been performed many times. It's very accessible, obviously, because it's for variable instrumentation, and it sounds pretty. It's like very modal sounding. There's not a lot of chromaticism going on. What's interesting about this piece is Riley was already kind of working on it at the San Francisco Tape Music Center as like a general style of writing music. This was working with tape loops, though. So he's working with like recorded sound being repeated mechanically. And he wanted to develop a way to have instrumentalists play this stuff. And this was sort of the result. And he, I guess, was very concerned with the psychedelic movement of the 60s and creating an experience in the concert hall that was more psychedelic than traditional music. What's interesting is he does have a huge body of like electronic music and improvised music, but he wasn't really writing a lot of stuff down. This is one of the few examples where he did write something down. But in the 1980s onward, the Kronos Quartet started commissioning him pieces. So he did get back into traditional composing, where you write on a page and work with a classical ensemble kind of thing. I think this piece is a good example of minimalism as this sort of like grassroots movement in large metropolitan areas in the US. Basically, he was not doing this with a full orchestra. I guess a larger ensemble was used for the premiere, but he just started doing house concerts with it in San Francisco. So this would just be like random musicians, whoever was interested. And it was around that point that this other minimalist composer, Steve Reich, whom we've covered in our string quartet series, he suggested using this eighth note pulse, which became a part of the performance notes, as we saw. The New York City premiere was at Carnegie Hall, and it shared a program with Octet by Igor Stravinsky. And that's kind of interesting if you can imagine how different in style those two pieces are sharing a program. But yeah, this was just like something that people really wanted to make happen, and it was sort of a collaborative effort of multiple composers and people in new music scenes in San Francisco and New York. And it's sort of, things really took off from there, because 20 years later we would have all kinds of minimalist composers taking advantage of the rise of neoliberalism and this desire of the like public to have American composers. And it's sort of like been recorded all kinds of times. This is the big recording. It's about 43 minutes long, and you can kind of imagine the performance practice of it actually went through many iterations before it got to this point where it's so clear what is desired. Because every time you perform it, you find newer problems or things that you're not quite happy with. I'm sure Terry, like, you know, this stuff was the easy part. He wrote this in an afternoon, right? It just kind of came from him. It was very improvised. And then the sort of like instructions part, that's what takes a bit more work. And of course, putting it on and making sure it gets performed and has a home, that's where the real work happens. And he did a great job. Now it's sort of this sort of milestone of American music. So I won't wax on about this too much more. If you want to listen to the recording I'm listening to, probably going to find that CBS recording. It's in the video description. We'll meet back in 43 minutes, and I'll let you know my thoughts. This type of score, I mean, you can have it in front of you while you listen, but there's not really much of a point to listening with the score, so I'm just going to lie down and relax and just listen to this particular performance of it. And I'm not going to do any psychedelic drugs today, but maybe that's closer to what the composer intended. And yeah, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so my immediate thoughts on this. This is not a full orchestra. I don't know why I got into my head that this was an orchestra piece, because this is like the recording that everyone knows, and it's only 11 people. And there's only one string player, right? So it's tons of winds. This recording is very like marimba and vibraphone heavy, right? Those are the instruments that really stick out the most from the ensemble. And a lot of the winds are a little bit out of tune at points, so it does have this sort of like noisiness to it. But it's very energetic, it's very full of life, and I think this size of ensemble, you can hear a lot of different things going on very clearly. And it's not, I think if you had a larger ensemble, you would have more modules going on at the same time. Things would be a bit blurrier. This is more like you get 5 or 6 things happening at the same time at the most. And for the most part, everyone is kind of keeping pace with one another. And it does sort of energize you. It makes you want to play or sing along. I would love to be a part of a performance like this, even if I was just the pianist that's holding down the metronome. The metronome in this recording, it starts and ends the piece, and it takes on almost this sort of like symbolic meaning or poetic meaning. It's like everything to my ears was emerging out of that high C. And yeah, it's like all of these like figures and rhythmic motives and happenings are kind of emerging from underneath this pulse. And yeah, I can see the electronic music influence. I don't think this would have ever existed if it weren't for tape and recording music technology. And maybe that's what Riley means about this being a more psychedelic piece, is you're sort of like finding this in between, like liminal space, somewhere in between electronic music and acoustic music. And obviously it resonates with people. All of these comments are super into it. Everyone loves this piece. I think that it is a very influential piece. There were moments in this where I heard a lot, and it may have just been my own mind playing tricks on itself, but I heard a lot of stuff in sort of 12, like 4/3, whenever there were 2 modules happening at the same time that were in like 3 and 4, you know. That's, even if there were other more complicated meters going on, that was what I would latch onto. And that is a sort of hallmark of Steve Reich's music. And Steve Reich's music also has a lot of percussion, kind of like this recording. The Steve Reich ensemble was kind of like this. It was like a hodgepodge of classical instruments, but like very percussion and piano forward. And yeah, I just think that revisiting this piece has made me appreciate how original Terry Riley is and how maybe unoriginal later minimalist composers are. This is something that every composer has to listen to. You can't really get a composition degree without knowing this. You can't really know anything about the past 70 years of contemporary music if you don't know about the minimalist movement and how important this particular work was to that. If you think this piece was psychedelic, if you have like experience with psychedelics, I would be happy to hear in the comments like how much you agree with Riley. Did he hit the nail on the head here, or does it just kind of sound like music? Next, I think we're going to listen to another Stockhausen piece, Gruppen. And Gruppen is actually a piece for 3 orchestras, so that'll be a nice change of pace.